In this video, I'm going to talk about naming conventions, what they are, why I like to use them, and how you can come up with your own. Basically, a naming convention is a set of rules or guidelines used to create consistent and meaningful names for variables, functions, classes, and other elements of a program. By following a naming convention, we can make our code more readable and easier to maintain. It also helps reduce errors and confusion, especially when we come back to the code weeks or months later. I'll cover some common naming conventions and show you how I use them in my code. I also use a Hungarian notation where a prefix is added to the variable name to indicate its type or scope. I found using a scope prefix is all I need. Here is the template that I use for my naming conventions. Here are some benefits of using a naming convention. Readability, maintainability, prevents name collisions, reduces variable shadowing, and helps with scope identification. If you're not using a naming convention, I would suggest that you at least try one to see how you like it. You can create your own naming convention based on what I'll show you in this video, or you can come up with it on your own or doing a search on the internet. But consistency is key. What I found helps me a lot is that if I keep all my code consistent from one strategy to an indicator and so on, then the code's a lot easier to follow along with. Your naming convention may evolve over time as you tweak it to your liking. Now I'll show you some sample code here as to how I use these naming conventions. So my using statements, they're just all lowercase. My input statements I prefix with an I, and I use a Pascal case where each word is capitalized. Constants, I like to use all caps with an underscore in it. That's called snake case. For variables, I like to prefix those with the letter M or a module level variable, which has to do with scope. Normally, you get a warning when you define a variable over a reserved word or a function name. In this case, in update 81 of version 10 of TradeStation, you no longer get that warning. The way that I found to get that warning back is to remove the input statement and just replace it with a variable statement. Now we get this warning back. Symbol is an EasyLanguage reserved word. It will no longer function as a reserved word. So what it does is it assigns what was a reserved word at once to a variable now, and it sets the variable value, default value to sim. So down here we can see sim and category is -999. This is what's considered a name collision. A variable name has collided with a reserved word, and it doesn't always give you what you expect. So you might try to use symbol or category later in the program, and you don't get what you expect. You get whatever the value is in the variable. We can use a naming convention to get around that with the prefixes of M. Now if I re-verify it, it shows me the symbol on the chart, and it shows me the symbol type of 2. I'm going to go ahead and put M's on the fronts of these. That's what my module level variables look like. Next, I'm going to show you how I use naming conventions inside a method. My methods start with a lowercase method, followed by the return data type, which is an order ticket, and the name of the method, create order ticket. The parameters are prefixed with a lowercase p for all of them. My variables I like to keep short, like IDX for some type of index or loop variable. Order ticket is OT. What I'm going to show you now is name shadowing, and this has to do with scope. So these are module level variables, and these are local variables. So a local variable can see this and reference any variable up here. But any other method outside of this one or down below the method or down below this once will not be able to access anything in here. This symbol here shadows that symbol there. Since I don't have a local symbol, it's going to use this symbol. So let's just check that. So here the symbol was sim before. Now after it, it's been selected, it's been set to new value, and the symbol now shows new value when it hits this print statement down here. What happens if I have two symbols? What do you think this symbol is going to update? Do you think it's going to update this instance or this instance? As a rule of thumb, what happens is EasyLanguage is going to update the scope that is closest to the variable. So inside of this method, it's going to update this string. So let's verify this. When this method is called, symbol is an empty string, which is shown here. Then we set it to new value, and then we print it, and it shows new value. But if we look at symbol down here, it's referencing this symbol up here. You want to be careful of variable shadowing, because when you update this variable, you might think you're updating this variable here in the module level, but you're actually updating the local variable inside the method. Now let's look at how naming conventions can help identify scope. In here, I have this short little variable, so I know it's coming from the inside of this method. The P name, that means it's coming in as a parameter, also the symbol, the price, and the type. Here I have a local variable called IDX that's going to a constant called max rows, so I know that that's defined up here outside of this method. Inside I have some code that shows you how to determine where these variables are declared. This is a local variable against an input because it starts with an I. Here we're looking at a parameter that crosses over an input. If we come down here and we look at enumerations, this is what I call a magic number. So on an order type is going to be like a market or a stop limit type order. But this number 3 is like a magic number. So if I'm looking at somebody else's code or they're looking at your code, they're going to have to go look up what a 3 is. And they can do that by pressing F1 and scrolling down here. We'll go down to the type and we'll look at the order type. So a 3 is a stop limit. If you're going to use a magic number, it's best to actually comment what that 3 is. Maybe like 3 equals stop limit. A better way is to use the order type enumeration. So here we can say order type dot stop limit. When we look down here, we're passing in a 3. So this is really ambiguous, like what is 3? If we use the order type enumeration, we can make the code much clearer. So instead of using, right here, we're using order type, and we're going to pass in a parameter of the type. So all we have to do is change this to order type stop limit. Now the code reads a lot cleaner. And this is preferential to this or that. This is how you can use naming conventions and enumerations to help self-document the code. Let's run through some variable names and see how they look. Here in this once block, I have something called app storage. I mentioned that app storage is more of a global level, at least I think it is, because the scope reaches to anything that's running on the chart, but it doesn't include workspaces or desktops. For numerics, I like active order count, terminal order count, open positions, minutes to session end. If you're going to name a variable where it's in a certain unit, it's important to include that unit on the front end of it or somewhere in the variable name. Strings, I like current symbol, event message, active account. Collections, I like to end with S's because they can hold multiple items, such as pivot lows, terminal orders. One thing I want to mention is here, this is the terminal order collection, where this is terminal order count. So this is a single variable versus a collection that can hold multiple values. Active rectangles, order types, queued items, start dates and end dates. Oh, look, here we have a name collision. See what that is? It's reserved for future use. A nice little M on the front of that would take care of that name collision. Use Boolean names that resolve to true or false, like can trade, is ready, order placed, and avoid vague names like replaced, opened, closed, order okay. They don't really give enough detail of what was replaced or opened or closed. There's another collision. Closed D, that's a series function. Nice little M on front of that, takes care of that one. Also for Boolean values, I like to use positive names like file found. Negative names are harder to read and understand, such as not found, unsuccessful, failed. Plus, these aren't really good names because they don't really give direction of what was not found or what was unsuccessful or failed. So here's an example I like to look at when using negative names and having to negate them to get a true. So if not found. Well, not found means it must have been found. So it's better to just say if found. If not unsuccessful. Isn't that successful? Well, we would hope so. Positive names, is found, is successful, file opened. Positive namings. This is how it looks in the code. Other good names, I like is, has, should, and was. Is active, has permission, should close, was logged out. Names to avoid: flag, done, found, okay, file 1, 2, and 3, val 1, 2, and 3. This is actually hard to read right here because it's an L, it's a lowercase l followed by the number 1. And if you just look at that and you're scanning the code, you may not see that. Here's flag and done inside the code. This is a much better name: can trade and if order sent. Avoid these short abbreviations in the code because when you come back to them later or your code gets really long, you may not know what they are. So OS is order sent. I meant it to be a shorter version of order sent. Or it could be option symbol. You don't know. You have to go look it up. Using pre-declared variables makes code harder to understand. Condition 1 and condition 2. We don't know what logic set these values, so we'd have to go up in the code and look. If file 1 okay and not file 2 closed, this is checking to see if file 1 and file 2 are open, but this one was declared in a negative context, so we had to negate it. If source file open and target file open, this is much better naming and it's way more self-documenting. Methods and function names: ELC format account, ELC format option security, and then other function names or methods: can trade, is connected, and close providers. Let's look at an indicator I wrote a while back and we'll see how the naming conventions look in it. Here's a larger program I wrote that uses some earlier naming conventions, but they're pretty close. Let's have a look. Here are all my using statements, all lowercase. Inputs all start with an I. Constants are uppercase split by an underscore. Dictionaries, these all end in S because they can hold multiple values. Here's a method. This is a create orders provider. Notice these are all prefixed with the lower p for parameters. Notice all these parameters are setting properties on the order provider object. Here's an event handler method that's been declared. A OP state changed and OP updated. This is the OP state changed. Here I wound up using data enumerations for data state, which are failed, loaded, loading, and unloaded. And then I did different things inside of each state. If we look at the data state, we have failed, loaded, loading, and unloaded, which are numbers 0 through 3. This is much more self-documenting and readable. Here's an example of a single entry order with a long exit. Here I've created my buy limits and sell limits using the OT create function. I call this multiple times. Here you can see I'm assigning the primary ticket to the OT entry, and then the secondary tickets are added with OT stop. This one is a single order entry long with one exit and one stop. So here's my buy, my limit, and my stop order. My primary ticket is assigned to OT entry, and then my siblings are OT target and OT stop. It's important to have good names because when you're trying to debug something like this, especially order tickets, can get really confusing. Down here's the main section of the code. This is the once block. Here I'm looking at account, which has a prefix of I, so I know that's an input. Here's app storage, so I'm setting some variables in app storage using camel case for the keys. I'm getting the values from inputs. These are method names inside the application. This one is a load order type collections, load directions, and load docking options. These last two load these combo boxes on the form. That's all I have for you today. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you'd like to be notified when I release new content. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.